to us from River Falls. Right now he coaches there. He's going to go over his background and all of that. Thanks everybody for coming, and thank you for joining us. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.
I'm not going to use the microphone. I think this is small enough room. I hope we can project. If you can't hear me, let me know. So yeah, we're going to talk about training theory and periodization. Smaller group, we can definitely have a discussion-like format. If you have any questions at any point in time about anything, feel free to hop in there. This is periodization geared a little bit more towards just all-speed power events, so not specific to the vertical jumps, but really applicable anywhere. So just quick background, currently coaching at University of Wisconsin River Falls. I've been at several universities around the country there, which you can see. I've been blessed to be Team USA coach twice, and then invited to coach the Thorpe Cup over in Germany this summer, so looking forward to that. I coached D1 for 21, 22 years, something like that. Was honored to be the South Region Head Coach of the Year twice and the Conference Coach of the Year 18 times. Then I've been coaching Division III for about 2 years now at River Falls, and I actually graduated from Bemidji and compete in Division II for 5 years there, including my red shirt. So I've been able to be at all the divisions and see a variety of different things. I've also been blessed to be the personal coach to athletes at all the different major championships around the world, which is not necessarily a credit to me. I've just been lucky enough to work with some talented athletes. I can contest that it's harder to coach the developmental athletes than it is the really, really good athletes, because they're so talented and skillful. They pick up things pretty easily. Coaching at the lower levels definitely takes some more coaching skill and ability, I think. And then my coach's education, I've helped write the sports sciences for the U.S. Track and Field and Cross Country College Coaches Association for their Master Coach certification. So wrote some of the sports sciences, presented that. I've done the World Athletics Elite Sprints Hurdles Coach certification, as well as all the different USATF ones and so on. So I love learning, I love growing, never want to stop. So I just enjoy that different coaches' education. I welcome the opportunity to share what I've been able to learn with you guys, and hopefully it'll benefit all of us. None of us do it on our own, so I just wanted to mention are a huge influence on me. You probably know some of these names. Cliff Revelto was the head coach when I was coaching at Kansas State. USATF Master Jump coach, coached Eric Kennard, amongst many others, but Eric Kennard, who had gold medal in the high jump in the Olympics, and so on and so forth. But I don't need to go through them all, but I just want to acknowledge them. They've advanced my career exponentially, and my knowledge of coaching, allowing me to break fewer athletes. So my goal today is to provide you with a framework to design the most effective training for your athletes. So yeah, it applies to vertical jumps, but it really applies to all speed power events. But if I can just get a little bit from you guys, why are you here? What's your goal? What are you hoping to learn? And maybe I can tailor or move that direction a little bit. Or is it just the vertical jumps classroom, so this is where I came?
No, I think that.
Okay.
Getting that kind of breakdown of what to look for when in the training season to make sure that we're peaking when we need to be.
Perfect. Yeah, so if you want me to dive deeper into a certain area, let me know. If I'm going too deep and you need me to back off and go a little shallower, just let me know. Like I say, I'm 100% here for you, so I want to tailor this to what your desires are. So the topics that I'm planning to cover: principles of training theory, the time frames of periodization, kind of how strength training interacts with that, peaking, obviously that's what it's ultimately about, is performing big at the right time at the championships, and then a little bit of motor learning and cueing and how that interacts with periodization. So some of the training theory principles that are important to know. First is the principle of least intensive demand. So as we're coaching our athletes, we want to use the least demand that's going to give them a stimulus to improve. Lots of times coaches will hit them as hard as they can, trying not to break them, but pushing them as hard as they can, and you will get rapid improvements that way, but you have to look at their career development. And if you slam all that intensity and volume on them right away at the beginning of their career, it's going to be difficult to have a broad base, to have a high peak to that pyramid. So least intensive demands is going to help them develop better over a long term. as well as prevent injury from trying to hit them too hard. Principle of overload is a very common training theory principle. You have to overload the system, you have to overload the body in order to stimulate adaptation. So, same as us, right? If we just sit at our desk and work all day, we're not going to get any stronger or faster. We got to go out and do something that's harder than our normal routine. And that's a progressive thing. As the athlete gets more talented and develops higher in speed and strength levels, power levels, then you need to increase the intensity or the density or the volume of that in order to overload them. So those are the three qualities that we're largely going to adjust within our training design. Is the intensity. As speed power athletes, the intensity is number one, the most important thing that we do. The density is how frequently you're hitting them with that speed and power stimulus, how frequently you're hitting the nervous system. So that could be Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It could be 3 days a week you're hitting them, so that'd be pretty dense. It could be Tuesday, Thursday, twice a week you're hitting the nervous system. So you can adjust that density. Lots of times, younger athletes, new athletes, you can have a lot more density of nervous system training, that high intensity training, just because their power output is so low. Whereas the older the athlete gets, the closer they get to the end of their career, the closer they get to their peak performance, you have to decrease that density because their horsepower output is so much higher than a developmental athlete that they'll just, they'll tear the tires off the car. So you got to drop the density down with those, higher level, older athletes, if you will. Then the principle of specificity. It's important to realize that the response is specific to the stimulus. So they've done a lot of studies, even a lying leg press versus an upright squat. And the upright squat is going to transfer better to running, even if you're doing the same sets, reps, design, all that type of thing, versus a lying position, that supine position. So just recognizing that like I say, the response is specific to the stimulus, so that's why we want to have stimuli that are specific to what we're trying to adapt, specific to the event. It's important to address the KPIs, the key performance indicators. We want to look at that when we're thinking about building a base, right? I talked about if you want to have a high peak to the pyramid, you have to have a broad base of that pyramid, otherwise it topples over and things fall apart on you. So the question then is, what is that base made of? Kind of some of the old school thinking, training design, if you will, is we're going to start off with mileage. We're going to start off with an aerobic base, that type of thing. That works well for your distance runner, your marathoner, but it has no application to a vertical jumper whatsoever. They don't need aerobic training at all, so an aerobic base is actually going to make them worse. Doing slow, long aerobic training decreases the fast twitch muscle fibers that you have. It's going to convert them to be more slow twitch muscle fibers. It's going to take away the bounce. I don't know any cross-country runners, no matter how talented they are, that can slam dunk a basketball. So it's important that when you think about building a base, what are the key performance indicators for a high jumper, for a pole vaulter, for whatever event it is that you're looking to train, and then making sure that the base that you're building is specific to that. So for example, with a high jumper, you might need a base of plyometrics. So we need to do a volume of pogo jumps, a low intensity plyometric activity, and we can build our volume through more so work capacity rather than stamina. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later on here, but just making sure that, because the principle of specificity, we want to make sure that we're addressing the key performance indicators for the event or for the athlete that we're training. This also has application in the weight room. So we want to be doing things that are more specific. So you're going to move, I guess I'll talk about this in just a second here, but from general to specific. So in the high jump, you're on the ground for 0.2 of a second on your takeoff step. Whereas if you do a really heavy 1 rep max squat, it might take you 5 seconds to push that bar up. That's not specific at all to being on the ground for 0.2 of a second. So looking at specificity in the weight room, developing starting strength, developing rate of force development, those things beyond simply heavy max strength. Heavy max strength can be a nice prerequisite to set up power development later on, but it's a means to an end. It is not the end. So it's important to look at what are you doing in the weight room, and also relative to the time of year, what are you doing? And like I say, I'll dive into that a little bit deeper later on here. We want to move from simple activities to complex activities. So like I said, doing simple pogo jumps prior to moving into bounding or more complicated things, or an alternate leg bound before doing a left, left, right, or different combinations that are more complex. So, and that's both, so all these training theory principles really apply career as well as year as well as week. You know, you can shrink or expand it, and the principles are still going to apply. So both over a training career, if you have a first-year athlete, they've got a training edge of 0. You want to be very simple with them before moving on to those more complex activities. So lots of times we see, or the athlete sees something that's really cool on Instagram or that type of thing, and hey coach, let's do this. Well, that might be a very advanced athlete doing this really cool looking thing, but it doesn't apply to them because it's not following the training theory principles that's going to help them adapt the best and help develop them over their career. So we want to move simple to complex, general to specific, which I touched on a little bit. That weight room example is a great example. So doing that, and we want to move from slow to fast. Again, the weight room example is kind of another, just a good example of moving from slower activities to faster activities. So if we look at, there is a role for some stamina work with the jumps. We want to have a freedom of movement when we take off in the jumps. A lot of times, a long jump, for example, we're going from a cyclical activity, stepping over the knee as we're running, to an acyclical activity of setting the quad and bouncing off the board. So, I just lost my train of thought, how I got there. Just talking about. I just went off task going into the long jump.
Slow to fast.
What's that?
Slow to fast.
Yes. Oh well, I'll come back to it. Then I already touched on, you know, you want to apply these not only to the annual plan, but to all the time frames of periodization. Okay, so what are those time frames? The career is the first thing that we want to look at, right? And it's difficult in the U.S. compared to a lot of the other countries, because a lot of the other countries, the athletic programs aren't run through the schools. They're run through clubs. So the same coach will work with them from the time they start, which could be when they're 8 years old, until the time they end, which could be 28 years old. So it's a little bit easier for them to think about that career development than it is for us sometimes. But I think if you want to serve your student athletes the best that you can, it's important for you to recognize what is that career development plan. Sometimes that means compromising how good they're gonna be for you when they're 17, 18 years old. You know, I see a lot of coaches. I was in the South for a long time, and there's a big club system for track and field in the South, and a lot of coaches would really crank up that intensity, and they would not apply, you know, the principle of least intensive demands, and they would get their athletes running really fast, but a lot of times they'd be totally burnt out before they got to college. Their only goal was to get a scholarship to go to college, and then once they had that, they weren't really passionate about the sport anymore. Or the college coach would have to kind of rebuild them and build that base of whatever those key performance indicators for those athletes are. So I think if you want to best serve your student athletes, you know, you being able to keep a mindset of their career and their long-term development is very important. And again, that might compromise a little bit what you get out of them during your time with them, but it can help them, you know, in the sport long-term. Then we look at an Olympiad. This is obviously a little bit easier with Olympians. You know, looking at that 4-year training cycle and how is that going to be broken up. But it can be very similar for a high school program, right? You have 4 years to work with them, and then how are you going to develop them over that 4-year plan? Then we're going to get more specific with an annual plan. How's that year training looking, and those principles of training theory moving from general to specific, moving from simple to complex, and how does that lay out throughout your annual plan throughout the year? A macro cycle is basically kind of your prep period through your championship period. So lots of times with college track and field, we'll have an indoor, so the fall through the indoor season, indoor championships, and then a second macro cycle taking us through the outdoor season to the outdoor championships. So a double periodization or 2 peaks for those type of athletes. The mesocycle will last from typically 3 to 6 weeks. And that's going to be a little bit more specific, dialed in, you know, getting a little bit more into the weeds and more specific details. Generally, each mesocycle is going to end with a low week, which allows them to recover. So a mesocycle, lots of times you might, if it's a 4-week cycle, you might do 2 moderate weeks, and then a high training load week, and then a low week to help them recover so that they can come into the next cycle and continue to build. So in the preparation phase, lots of times it will ladder up the moderate, high, rest, moderate, high, rest as you're building that volume, intensity, density as you're overloading the system. Coming into the peaking time in the competitive season, lots of times they'll go the opposite direction. The first week of the cycle will be a high week, then a moderate week, and if you're doing a 4-week cycle, you might do another moderate week, and then the low week, the recovery week. So that will help them kind of unload so that you can peak them into the championships. And that's going to happen if you're doing a double periodization, you're doing 2 macro cycles, it's going to happen twice. You're going to build in the prep period of those macro cycles, and you're going to unload in the main competition period of those macro cycles. From there, looking at the microcycle, which is typically 7 days, and that doesn't mean you're training for 7 days. It could be Saturday and Sunday are off, and you're training 5 days, but usually it's a weekly cycle that can adjust over different time frames depending on what you need to accomplish. You want to look within the microcycle at complementary training. So we want to look, how does Tuesday complement Monday? How does Wednesday complement Tuesday? So generally what I will set up my athletes with, Monday and Wednesday, we're training the nervous system very intensely. And then Tuesday and Thursday, we're going to back off on them and let them recover a little bit. We're going to have a low intensity demand on the nervous system. I might be jumping ahead, but if I am, I'll just skim through the later slides. One thing that I learned that I found extremely valuable, and I think it will help you guys a lot, when you have low levels, you produce low levels of lactic acid, you get that little bit of burn in your muscles, it causes your growth hormone levels to shoot up. So I will intentionally design training on those Tuesday, Thursdays, on our recovery days, to build a little bit of lactic acid. It can't be too significant. I'm sure you've seen 300 hurdlers, 400 hurdlers. At the end of the race, hurdles 9 and 10 look ugly. So that lactate, if it gets to too high of levels, is going to negatively impact the nervous system, and it's going to inhibit speed development. It's going to inhibit skill development, and you can see that, like I say, very clearly at the end of a 400 hurdle race. That skill is getting real sloppy, real ugly. So we don't want to hit too high of lactate levels, but we would just want that light to moderate lactate level. And like I say, that's going to shoot up growth hormone. That's an anabolic steroid that's natural in your body. So you can get a steroid effect that's natural, healthy, legal, ethical in designing your training that way. So to not take advantage of that is a huge miss. It's a huge loss. So that's something that I look at with the complementary training. If I'm going to hit the nervous system, we're going 100 miles an hour on Monday, Wednesday. We might drop it down to 70 miles an hour on Tuesday, Thursday through hurdle mobility, medicine ball tosses, general strength, body weight calisthenics, those different type of things, light skill work. We're not going to do real intense skill work because that's going to be hitting the nervous system, right? If we're doing full approach long jumps on our low day, the full approach long jumps are pretty intense. So we want to have a pretty clear differentiation whether we're training the nervous system or we're training, the endocrine system, which is kind of where you get that little bit of lactate system, stimulus, or you're training the energy systems, if you need some of that tempo running or whatnot. But knowing why you're plugging it in there is going to be very valuable to help you design the complementary training that's super effective for the athletes to really respond and adapt well to. And then the training session, that's your 2-hour block, or however long you're training them for. So within the training session, we want to look at compatible training design. So if Monday is going to be an accelerator, let's say Monday is going to be a short neuromuscular day, right? We're going 100 miles an hour, but it's going to be very high intensity. We want to make sure that everything within that training session makes sense and works together. So if we're going to be doing acceleration development, for example, we're doing block starts out to 30 meters, we want to make sure that the other things are compatible with that. So we might follow that up with a short plyometric jumps. So standing long jumps, standing triple jumps, 5 bounds, things like that. That's going to be a more power type of activity. We might go in the weight room and we might do cleans from the floor. So the position starting the clean from the floor is very similar to the block start position. You just roll over and put your hands in the ground and you basically have a block start position. So looking at everything in that session is high intensity. If you're doing a lower intensity session, you're helping them recover, you're having a general day, you want everything within that session. So you might do some light technique, you might do some 8-step long jumps or something like that. And when I say 8 steps, I mean 8 total, not 8 lefts or 8 rights. But so you might do, some light technical work, even with your sprinters. You might do some light technical work, some posture of max velocity, different things like that. Like I say, following that up with other lower intensity activities, your unit strength, your hurdle mobility, your injury prevention work, all that type of stuff. All right, so I already kind of broke into them a little bit. We'll go a little bit deeper here. So looking at the periodization over an athlete's career, the biggest thing I can say is be patient, right? As athletes, our society nowadays, instant gratification, right? You want a song, you don't have to wait till the CD comes out and go buy the whole CD. You can just download that one song immediately. And I think the athletes, they see some on Instagram and they want that instant gratification. And I think that's just human nature, right? We want it now. But so when you're looking at that career development, being patient, I think, is the first thing and the most important thing that comes to my mind. You want to use multilateral training design, so you want to be, having different movements. When you think about building a base, I want to be able to move backwards efficiently, sideways efficiently, upside down. If you got pole vaulters, you got to be able to be upside down, right? So there's different activities that we'll plug in to address all those, and lots of times those simpler things, might fall on a general day for us. Don't max them out right now, unless that's the end of the road for them. If they're just not going to go on to college, they don't have the desire to continue competing in college and beyond that, maybe you do want to go ahead and max them out for the high school career and get them as much success as possible. But if it's that athlete that could go on for another 10 years after that, if you max them out right now, mentally, almost maybe more than physically, if you got them burned out, then you're hurting them long term more than you're helping them. So I think keeping that in mind is important. Set them up for their future. And then similar, how we drive, how we lay out an annual plan. We're generally going with a general preparatory phase. We're going general to specific, right? And then we're going with a specific preparatory period. Then we're going with a pre-competition period, and then we're going with competition period training. So we're going to be generalists to be specific. And you want to do that over the career too, right? You want to go general to specific. So if they're first year, they got a training age of 0, all their training should be pretty general, and they're going to adapt and they're going to get better because of that. Could you make them better faster? Absolutely. You can crank up the intensity, but then you're not building that broad foundation to set up that long-term growth for them. Like I say, that first year might be very general nature, and you might really need that. Lots of times we'll do hurdle mobility, and I presume everybody does hurdle mobility. You're familiar with it? More or less, hopefully. So, we'll literally have them go over a hurdle, and I'll just call it my static series, and we'll step over, and they have to hold it, and get balanced, and they have to hold it for 3 seconds. Well, balance is one of the most basic forms of coordination or skill development. So we're going to start with that general skill development, general coordination work, because that's going to allow a big base for them to build upon when we get into those more specific skill areas. And I, liken it to driving a stick shift. Anybody drive stick shift anymore? All right, nice. We got some people. If you go from first, and you miss second gear and you hit third gear, the car's going to bog out, right, or stall on you. And the same thing happens with training design. If you go from general and you jump right into competition training, lots of times their adaptation is going to stall out on you. So it's important that you're taking your time going through the gears, take the time going through the phases, both career-wise as well as during a training year. So taking a look at an Olympiad, or that 4-year plan, it can vary by athlete, it can vary by your program. Lots of times the year 1 of that plan might be a more technical year. If it is an Olympiad and you're working with an Olympic athlete or a high-level athlete, they're doing 4-year cycles. If you're going to do any technical changes, the year after the Olympic year, you're going to go from an 18-step long jump approach to a 20-step long jump approach. Doing that in that first year gives them the most time to adapt to that before that next Olympic Games. Obviously, with new high school athletes, a 9th grader, we've got to teach them everything for the most part, unless you have a good middle school program. But technique can be a good place to start. Developing that speed, moving into maybe more of a strength emphasis when they have a pretty good foundation of that technique and speed. And then the 4th year, I put health. You're always better to be 100% healthy than to be 100% trained. You can be really, really powerful, but if you're injured and you can't toe the line, it doesn't matter. And again, that's kind of a type of thing that I will use with the athletes. I'm not saying this is the way, or certainly not the only way, but maybe something just to play around with your mind a little bit. And you might write workouts and here's group A and here's group B, and group A is doing a little bit more technical work and group B is doing a little more speed work. Or it could, I mean, talking about a long jump, for example, the technique work might be an 8-step long jump because they're a little slower speed. They can do the spatial mechanics a little bit better, whereas your upperclassmen, they might be going a little bit more speed oriented. They might be doing a 12-step long jump at the same time the other athlete's doing an 8-step long jump. So your practices don't have to be totally diverse and spread out doing opposite things. Just within whatever you're doing, the context of you're doing, you can apply it, you know, individually for the different athletes and their training age, their ability levels. So taking a look at the annual plan, generally we want to move from short to long. You know, I kind of mentioned the running is going to hurt the speed power athlete. The running mileage, doing aerobic development is going to hurt them physiologically more than it's going to help them. But sometimes just due to maturation, you know, we went from 9th grade to 10th grade, they went from 15 years old to 16 years old, you know, they got better maybe despite the training rather than because of the training. So yes, sometimes you'll see results, positive results from doing 3-mile runs, 4-mile runs, 5-mile runs, whatever that is. But the science will clearly tell you that it's not the way to do it, and it's going to stifle their development more so than it's going to help them. So you want to move short to long. I'll start with speed on day one. Now that might be a 10-meter scramble. So sometimes you can make it fun for them, give them and develop a little coordination. Some of those type of things. Start them on their back. They got to roll up and they race, you know, for 10 meters. Start them in a push-up position. They got to push up and they race for 10 meters. So you can do a shorter. So we can be doing speed work, but on a shorter end, so you're not worried about pulling hamstrings or different things like that because they're not prepared. And then you can just extend those out 15 meters, 20 meters, so on and so forth. So starting kind of short to long as far as our neural development, our speed development, and then kind of all at the same time go long to short, you know, when I'm thinking about the stamina work. So stamina can more likely be thought of as work capacity. So, you know, what is that base that we need for our long to short? Maybe we need a little bit of running. So the long to short might be I'm starting with 2,000 meters of total volume in this running workout, so 10 200s is just an easy math, right? And then as you go on and maybe you're doing 10 200s with 2 minutes rest, and then the next cycle of training you're doing 1,800 meters of total volume, and the next cycle you're doing 1,600 meters of total volume. But as that total volume is decreasing, the intensity is increasing, and the rest period is increasing with it. So we might go long to short as far as the stamina side of things. Now my thought came back to me that I lost earlier. Why do we need stamina for jumpers? If you're moving into the high jump, you're a world-class high jumper, you might be sprinting your curve at about 8.5 meters per second. If you look at, you know, how does a 150 or a 180 line up to that, the velocities will be very similar. I was talking, we need our freedom of movement coming into that long jump takeoff. We need to move from a cyclical activity to an acyclical activity, which is a very complicated thing to do. So the more freedom of movement that you have, the more relaxation you have, the easier it is to execute those takeoff mechanics. So I view the stamina work, that tempo running, if you will, as special skill. Is they're able to sprint a 150 faster, then they should be able to be more relaxed, have better freedom of movement, and come down the runway faster and still be able to execute some takeoff mechanics. So they definitely don't need 10 200s for the sake of fitness. They don't need it for aerobic development, but they need that maybe as a prerequisite to when you get down to doing, you know, maybe 900 meters of total volume at a much higher velocity, so that they can get that special skill development. Because, I mean, they're running down the runway for 4 seconds, you know, 5 seconds, 6 seconds, depending on how long their approach is. That's alactic and aerobic. The aerobic system has nothing to do with it, so you don't need to train the aerobic system. The aerobic development is a byproduct of all the other training that you're doing. We're using our aerobic system right now. You're using your aerobic system when you recover from all of your short sprint training. You're using your aerobic system when you recover from your plyometrics. So the aerobic system is getting trained as a byproduct. The only time that we train it at all is just kind of that prerequisite to building into that speed endurance. That's going to be some really, really fast runs later on with longer rests, just building them into that. And that's where we're going with kind of our long to short. And again, it's total volume. It's not going from a mile repeat down. I mean, we're talking 200s, maybe 300s, you know, with the jumper, which is pretty far for a jumper. So looking at that, so with the annual plan, obviously you guys don't have a year-long training season, but you can shrink or expand that and it's still going to hold water. So you're still going to move that general prep, specific prep, pre-comp, comp. Again, you can stretch that out if you have a year to work with the athlete, or you can shrink that down if you have 3 months to work with the athlete. If you have sound training theory and periodization design, it'll work equally well, whether that the whole package is shrunk or whether the whole package is expanded. I already talked, moving from general to specific, slow to fast, and then when we're just talking about teaching or motor learning a little bit, we want to go with that whole part teaching, and that's kind of that simple to complex. So teach them the whole movement, let them just familiarize themselves with it, give them an idea of what they're trying to accomplish, and then go into the more specific, little more detailed drills, the skills and drills activity, and then synthesize and put that back together, those skills and drills, into the whole event. So that's going to be working, like I say, from simple to complex. And then, I think it's important to apply the principle of specificity. Some coaches get locked into drills and they're just drilling the entire year. They need to do it in the event, right? And again, the training theory tells you with the principle of specificity, I need to do the event. We need to teach within the context of them doing the event because speeds are different, elasticity is different. Taking high jump, I don't do a lot of short run high jumps. I typically do a 10-step approach for a full high jump. If you have them do a 4 or a 5-step or a shorter high jump, they're moving at much slower velocities. They're going to have more concentric contractions coming off the ground to try and jump rather than elastic activity, elastic energy bouncing them off the ground when you're doing a full approach at higher velocities. So is there a place for short run jumps? Sure, but I get pretty fast in doing full approach and sticking with full approach jumps, with the high jump as an example, just because it is a different event, and we need to train them specifically for what their needs are for competition.
Do you apply that to young new jumpers? Right, if they've never run a curve before in their life, are you still starting at 10 steps with them?
Yes. I'm very patient. I would, and I'm not going to lie, I would maybe be different if I was coaching high school. But I will tell you that I have a girl who's trying to learn the hurdles, and we work hurdles every single week, but I have not entered her in a hurdle race yet because she's not ready to do them. And I don't want her 4-stepping or 5-stepping or, I want her being able to do it right before I put her in a situation where she's going to fail. She doesn't have the ability to do it right yet. So I would be patient. I would be patient enough. Now, if I'm starting to lose all my athletes because they need a little more entertainment, then I might switch it up a little bit, right? Because we're there for the athletes. But when I design high jump, we don't even start to find an approach until about our 3rd month of training, because we're developing max velocity mechanics, acceleration mechanics, curve running mechanics, and that takes a while. So I'm pretty, now again, your whole season is 3 months in many cases. So you kind of have to adapt and then push them through maybe a little bit faster than you'd want to. And it might be that they can't handle a 10-step approach. Maybe they just, that speed, they don't have enough elastic strength. So it might be that for a freshman, somebody brand new, maybe 8 steps is it. That's all they go, or 6 or 7, or I think that'd be just a matter of kind of playing with. But my philosophy is, and it's a lot easier because I have a full year, but just being patient and developing them into being able to do it right before we try to do it at the competition level. You can't see this at all. So this is an example of an annual training plan that I use. So I will actually kind of map it out each year. It's a very live, living document. It changes as the year goes on. The athlete change. You might have a minor injury. You might have COVID, right? And they're out 10 days, and you got to switch things up, or whatever that is. So it is a very living document. But I'll just kind of point out a couple things. So right here is one macro cycle, and then here is a second macro cycle, and here is a third macro cycle. So this is a professional athlete who is doing an indoor season and an outdoor season, and then qualified for a bigger later championship. So there's kind of a third periodization there. So the big box here, this is the amount of time spent in preparation for the indoor season. That's the amount of time spent in competition. Again, I've got more time to work with them, so it's a little bit easier. But also, our indoor competition is not our biggest goal, right? It's the outdoor. It's the Olympic trials. It's the Olympics. It's World Championships. It's those type of things. So we can spend more time in prep and then have a very short amount of time in that competition training period. I'll have a transition week, just kind of mentally, physically recover, come off of that indoor scene a little bit, and then we're going to get after it for outdoor. So 3 cycles of outdoor preparation in this particular plan, and then it's 3 shorter cycles. It's almost the same amount of time, so it's almost a 50-50 amount of time spent in preparation and competition for that second cycle. And then it's actually a shorter time in preparation versus competition in that 3rd training cycle. Training theory indicates that you want to spend about 2/3 of your year in preparation and about 1/3 of your year in competition. I don't know how the high school system does it, because like 2 weeks into training you're in competition. But I think personally what I would do is I would still train them kind of in that preparation, in that pre-competition, to develop those skills, to develop that correct base that you want, because otherwise I think that, you know, in many cases the wheels will start to fall off at the end of the season because they didn't have that foundation to build upon. And then just so you can see, this is kind of general preparation here. This is specific preparation. This is the pre-comp period, so that falls still within preparation. Then that short comp period, and then the specific comp, or main comp. This is specific, and then pre-comp, and then similarly pre-comp, and then into the championship competition period. So kind of laid out. These they're testing in the fall that we're doing at the end of each cycle. The red are kind of some of the bigger championship type of meets that they're going to be attending. So I'm always plugging in what's the major championship and then working backwards from there. So this is essentially my roadmap. If we want to consistently get where we're trying to go, we need a map to get there. Or you need to have done it so many times that you got it memorized and you know where you're going. But that changes every year, right? And it changes athlete to athlete, and when championships are. I mean, Olympic trials sometimes are at the beginning of August, sometimes they're at the beginning of June. So you got to constantly kind of adjust with that type of thing. But I'll always plug in the championships, work backwards, and then the little X's just look like dots probably to you. You can kind of see how those are going up during the fall as we're increasing that overload, and then they're coming down in that championship time, and then we're building up, and then they're coming down in the competition period into the championship time, and then a very short up in that preparation for the third cycle, and then coming down in that championship time. So constantly adjusting the load, and then you can also see at the end of most every cycle, this one's in the middle, but at the end of most every cycle, it's a low week. So not only planning the work, not only planning the overload, but also planning the restoration. Recovery is the most important thing, and our athletes are really, really bad at it. I don't believe in overtraining. I don't think that it really exists. I'm a huge believer in under-recovering. And I think that's the usual problem of overtraining, is that the athlete is under-recovering. They're not sleeping properly, they're not eating healthy, they're not taking care of themselves, before or after training sessions, different stuff like that. But it is crucial to us that we are planning in the recovery, because it's not during the set of squats that they get stronger, it's after they recovered from the set of squats that they got stronger. So I think it's, if you're not actively thinking about recovery, definitely missing something, and probably, the athletes are missing something. They can get a lot better when you are addressing and plugging in that recovery. And then this stuff you don't really need to worry about. This is just kind of specifics of different things that I'm focusing on during that training cycle. I might be focusing more on acceleration or speed development or speed endurance or strength development or whatever that is. So I'll just kind of plug in different things, or sometimes I'll plug in notes during the indoor season with the college athletes. I plug in a note, start working on the 4x1. I don't want to wait until we go outside to work on the 4x1. I want to have a 4x1 pretty well laid out before we even went outdoors. But I'm not thinking about that usually when I come back from the Christmas break. I'm not thinking 4x1 because we're inside. So I'll just kind of plug some notes into the annual plan just for myself to trigger my memory, or I'm at a clinic like this and there's some different things that pop in my head and like, oh, I want to plug that in. This is the time of year I need to plug that in. So a lot of times I'll just put different notes in there for myself to make sure I'm not forgetting stuff as we go along. What are we doing on time? 20 minutes? I think pretty good. So actually I need to move faster, so I'll skim through this a little bit quicker. But looking at the macro cycle, again, that's going to be kind of the annual plan for you guys, because you basically have more or less 3 months to work with the athletes. You could have a single, double, or triple, as I had shown there. So we want to look at super compensation. So that's basically how we're going to adapt. So we're going to overload the system. they're gonna be tired, right? And then we're gonna rest them, and they're gonna super compensate to a higher level. Their body's gonna adapt to the stimulus that we gave them. If you train them too hard, that's this red line, they're gonna take a long time to get back, and they might only come back to baseline if you train them too heavy, okay? If you train them too light, they're gonna super compensate, but they're not gonna adapt as well. They're not gonna, improve as much. But if you train them right on, they're gonna have the best improvement. So there's our Goldilocks principle. We don't wanna do too little, we don't wanna do too much, we wanna do just the right amount. That takes your eyes, your observation. How are the athletes recovering? Are they looking good? Do they look beat up? Do I need to plug in some more rest? Those different type of things. But the one thing I do want to point out, if you undertrain them, they still get better. If you overtrain them, they don't get better. So that's kind of what I said with that 4th year in Olympiad training cycle, or just every year within the annual plan going into the championships. Health is more important than speed or strength or power or skill or anything else, because you want them to be improving and getting better. And if you overtrain them, then you're going to lose that opportunity. So it's better to undertrain them and have them healthy and have them still improving, still hitting the peak at the right time, even though it might not be as high of a peak. But it's risk versus reward, right?
Just a quick question on that.
Yeah.
Kind of relates. You said Monday intense, Tuesday recovery.
Yep.
What are you throwing weight in the weight room explosive stuff? Is that on your hard day?
Yeah. So that's a great question. We're hitting our neuromuscular training in the weight room on our neuromuscular day on the track. So for me, it's typically Monday, Wednesday. If we're not competing on the weekend, then Friday we're hammering them again. So I'll have 3 intense lifting days. In the preparation period, and this might be a little bit deep, but on Monday, I like to use that training session to kind of stim them up for Wednesday. So Wednesday, we're gonna do some high intensity, quality speed development work. On Monday, I wanna stim them up for that. So lots of times we're training the neuromuscular system, but it's gonna be more acceleration development type of work. A little bit shorter volumes if you're going 30 meters versus doing a 90-meter sprint float sprint on Wednesday. So Monday is going to be neuro, but it's going to kind of stim them up for Wednesday. So in the weight room on Monday, lots of times I'll do starting strength. So starting strength is working at about 30% of your max, give or take. So you're moving the bar really, really fast because 30% of your max is not that heavy. It's a lot heavier than what you're doing on the track with body weight, but it's nothing compared to doing max strength. So really moving that bar fast, having the intent of how quickly can I get that bar moving at maximum speed. How soon into the effort of that clean can I get that bar at maximum speed, and with the lightweight you can get that going pretty good. So that's a real nice way to kind of stim the nervous system. Then you have that general day on Tuesday, it recovers them, and now Wednesday they're real stimmed up and ready to rock for some quality speed development. In the weight room on Wednesday, I'll a lot of times do rate of force development work. So we did speed on the track. Rate of force development is going to be kind of 70 to 80% of what your max is. Now, if you're doing sets of 1, it's going to be like 70 to 80%. But if you're doing sets of 3, you can't do 3 reps 100%, right? Of your max strength. So that might be, let's say 90% is what you could do of your max for 3 reps. And then if I'm doing rate of force development, I'm doing 80% of that 90%. So that might drop me around 70% of your max strength if you follow that math. If not, I can explain more afterwards. We can write it out. But so we're hitting that rate of force development work. So rate of force development is extremely important in the weight room. And that is, it's going to be a little bit heavier, so it's going to take you a little bit longer to get that bar moving. But once you get it moving, how fast can I get that bar going? So starting strength is basically how fast can I start the bar at, how quickly can I get to that max strength, how soon can I get to that max speed, whereas the rate of force development is going to take you a little bit longer to get to that max speed, but how fast can I get that bar moving. Then Friday we'll come back after doing our stamina work, whatever that looked like for that day, and then we're hitting our max strength. So it could be all different kinds of constructs, but let's say a 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 of some heavy deep squats, and they hate me on Fridays because they just came exhausted off the track, and now we come to the weight room and we're hitting max strength. But then they've got Saturday and Sunday to recover from that. They got the weekend to recover, and we can come back Monday and have another great training session. And so Tuesdays, Thursdays we also lift. But Tuesdays, Thursdays we do what I call bodybuilding, which might be 2 sets of 10, 12 different exercises with like 30 seconds rest between the exercises. So it's a little bit more like circuit training, but we're hitting a lot of small muscle groups. We're hitting, you know, different joint exercises versus whole body exercises. So it's way less demanding on the nervous system. They're getting that little bit of burn in their muscles because they have the short rest and you're doing 10 reps. But it's more localized. It might be a bicep versus your entire lower body. So we're getting that little bit of lactate stimulus. We're getting that growth hormone boost, which is actually going to help them recover. They feel like they're breathing hard. They're huffing and puffing. Their muscles are burning a little bit. They think they're working harder on Tuesday than Monday. But their nervous system's recovering while their endocrine system is being worked. So you can almost say that it's hard each day, but it's different systems. You know, the nervous system's working hard, endocrine system's working easy. Then the endocrine system's working hard, your energy systems are working hard, while the nervous system's recovering and working easily. So it's kind of alternating back and forth there. So we are lifting on that Tuesday, Thursday, but it's totally different type of lifting.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hang with me here.
Sure.
So I coach high jump specifically,
Mhm.
and we have a very large staff, very specific to each event. And my jumpers are sprinters, they're hurdlers, they're triple jumpers, long jumpers. I have some who throw. I have one who ran the 800 last year.
Mhm.
So for the larger staffs, and say I might get a jumper at the end for 20 minutes, and have 20 minutes to figure something out, and I'm not sure what everybody else is doing, other than communication is key. Like, do you have any advice for the cycles and how you align with
You need to come to my
larger
multi-event
staffs?
talk.
Okay.
Have you looked at the schedule? Come on.
That one wasn't on my radar, but yeah.
If you can, I'm going to address exactly that with an entire presentation. So if you can make it, by all means. If not, let's talk afterwards, and I'll break it down for you
Okay.
a little more in depth. But so you bring a great point. You know, we talk about our super compensation, right? That happens a little bit within the week. We train the nervous system. It gets tired. We recover their nervous system. We're ready to go higher for Wednesday. And then we train the nervous system, and this is basically a repeat. I could have put another one of this in here, and you're going to see this kind of continual improvement back on. So this type of compensation can happen over an annual plan. It can happen over a mesocycle, you know, over a 3 or 4 week training cycle. It can happen within the week. And that's so, and again, we're planning that restoration within the week, within the training cycle, within the year, all those type of things. So that's a really good point. Yeah.
This cycle here, I've seen this, you have super compensation coming in here, but the time axis, it's always just sort of just time, it never says, this is 48 hours right here.
Mm-hmm.
How do we know for sure that 48 hours is where we should hit them again?
That's going to be your eyes, because it's going to change, and that's the hard thing, is it's going to change by athlete. Because you're going to have some athletes that take care of themselves really well, and you're going to have some athletes who are sleeping 4 hours a night and they're playing video games till 4 a.m. So those athletes are going to respond differently, and that's why they can't put a time frame on it, you know, a specific time frame, because it's going to be different for each individual. So there's a general rule of thumb, 48 hours for a neural session. But if you can go back-to-back neural days, but you have to know why you're doing it, and you have to give them proper recovery following that. A lot of the college meets, you compete Friday and Saturday, you know what I mean? So there's a reason within your training design to have 2 neural days back-to-back. But then again, you have to recover them properly following that, because they're going to have greater fatigue if you do 2 neural sessions back-to-back. So you're going to have to let them recover. But it's going to be how you design your training. It's going to be based on how the athletes, you know, just adapt to the training. How are they recovering, you know, in their own personal lifestyle. So there's a lot of different factors.
So it seems, if I may follow up, it seems that really to err on the other side here and go a little longer, you had mentioned maybe giving Saturday, Sundays recovery days,
Mm.
you know, to go Monday, Thursday,
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
you're a little bit, your odds of hitting a successful point of retraining on a hard day is perhaps optimized.
For sure. And that's just because if they had Saturday, Sunday off, you could do a general day on Monday. I've done it. I mean, I've had them where maybe they're doing combining them. Maybe they did a decathlon earlier and they need a little more recovery. We can start the next week with a general day and just build in a little bit more recovery in there. And that's kind of the fun of it. That's what I love about training design and periodization. It's almost like a game of chess. And how do I move the pieces around? How do I move my neural days, general days? How do I fit there? You know, how do I fit in multiple events, right? training the athlete for multiple events. But if you understand the principles behind it, then you can apply, how am I going to actually dial this in, for this athlete, for this training week, whatever that is.
I think it's also important that your athletes feel comfortable enough to be honest with you and tell you that they are playing AU basketball and volleyball on the weekend.
Yep.
We all know, because I'll tell like my jumpers, I'm like, if you jumped all weekend, we're certainly not jumping on Monday. or
Absolutely.
Tuesday, because your legs are burned already, and then we're not gonna get better.
Yeah.
But you have to tell me that, because I know some of the schedule, but I don't know everybody's basketball jail schedule.
Right.
So,
Yeah, you're
that has helped a ton this past year, get the jumpers to higher heights, because we're not burning them out when we know they've already done that. So.
I mean, and that's a great piece of advice. We have the same thing at the college. I mean, sometimes they'll be playing intramurals or whatever, but sometimes it's like, hey, did you go to that Halloween party? do you need to take a day off? You look a little hungover, or whatever that is. But yeah, you're right. Getting the athlete to be honest with you and developing that relationship is key, and that is where it's hard if you got a program with 100 boys and 100 girls. But yeah, the better relationship you have, the better off you are. So looking at the mesocycle here, you want it to be themed in line with your annual plan, with your macrocycle. You kind of saw how that chart that I had laid out, and I'm going to make sure that those are fitting. 2 to 6 weeks, typically 3 to 4 weeks. I've moved to doing more 3-week mesocycles because at the end of each cycle I've got a recovery week. So now every 3rd week they're getting a recovery week rather than every 4th week. So it'll change within the year. There'll be some cycles that'll be 4 weeks, some that'll be 3 weeks, but that's something to look at just as you're adjusting density, right? If I have a recovery week more frequently, I have a little less density, so they're gonna be able to recover better, adapt a little bit better. I'm gonna skip the block versus complex training, complementary training design we talked about a little bit. We want multi-system training. I've talked about some of the different systems, but with the multi-system, we want to be training the nervous system. For a speed power athlete, that's the #1 thing that we need to be training is the nervous system. We want to be training the skeletal muscle system. So not just the muscles, but also the skeletal system. I will have them do I rate the weight training for our entire program, including cross country, and I will have cross country stand with as much weight as they can have on their back because it's going to increase bone mineral density and prevent stress fractures. Having that loading and having that time under tension is important for the skeletal system, not just the muscles. So just recognizing even, how do we train the skeletal system? How are we training the muscles? How are we training the endocrine system? How are we training the cardiovascular? So having a multi-system training design is going to help them maximize their ability to adapt and be as good as they can for you. And I've talked about planned recovery pretty thoroughly.
So if they are playing a second sport, which is I would say a large number of our athletes during the season, thinking we're probably trying to build 2 days of rest into our weekly plan when we have them Monday to Friday if they're playing on the weekends. What would be the way that you would prioritize training during the week for those 3 days you might actually be able to train? Like, are you doing your neuromuscular and then an off neuromuscular? Is that kind of how you?
Yeah, probably. I mean, it would depend on how they're adapting, and that's the thing that sucks. Like, you might have to give them 1 neuromuscular day a week if they're doing outside stuff that's taxing the nervous system, which you're not going to want to do because it is going to kind of limit how quickly they're developing for you. But at the same time, if you overtrain them because you're giving them 2 or 3 neural days a week and they're not resting, they're going to go the wrong direction anyways. So sometimes, and that's where I see the patience. Like, it's hard to keep 1 neural day a week. You're like, we're only training 1 day a week. I mean, you feel like you should be doing a lot more. And that's where I think just that patience within the year, within their training career, I think that's almost the hardest thing as a coach, is to be patient enough to not do as much as you'd like to. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Microcycle, we want that complementary training design. We want to send the body a consistent adaptation message. So if we're doing acceleration, we're doing cleans from the floor, we're doing short run or short plyometric activities, that type of stuff. So looking at some of our grouping considerations, I think I've kind of beat this to death, but are we doing a neural session or are we doing a general session? You can look at the duration of neural output. So on Monday I talked about the acceleration theme. Wednesday might be more of a max velocity theme. So we might have them do 40 meters of straight leg bounds as kind of a plyometric activity following their sprint training. So if they're doing a 90-meter sprint float sprint, a little more extended duration of neuromuscular output, that 40-meter straight leg bound is going to be a little extended duration of neuromuscular output. And then we might send them in the weight room, and we might do snatches, 6 sets of 4. Doing the 4 reps is a little bit more extended duration of neural output versus doing 1s or 2s that we might do on Monday. But then the snatch is also going to be a lighter weight on the bar, a faster speed of movement. So everything that we're doing there is complementary with everything else we're doing in the session. So looking at the duration of neural output, I'll look at rhythms, and this is very applicable to multi-event athletes. So hurdles and pole vault, you got that boom boom into the takeoff, right? You got that, the hurdles that 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's going to be kind of a similar rhythm into the takeoff between hurdles and pole vault, or between high jump and javelin. I know we don't have javelin in Minnesota, but hitting that stiff block leg and moving through that in the javelin is pretty similar to hitting that stiff block leg and taking off in the high jump. So looking at, what are some different rhythms and similarities between events, and we might work 2, sometimes even 3 events within a training session because they are all compatible with each other, and it's going to actually help the learning process for the athlete. So grouping by rhythms, and I'll even say the opposite. Putting long jump and triple jump on the same day is typically a pretty bad idea because they're very different rhythms. The long jump, you're trying to set that quad and bounce off the board using your leg almost like a pole vault pole, whereas triple jump, you're trying to run off the board. So the takeoff mechanism is totally different. The rhythm coming into takeoff, therefore, is different. So putting those on the same day a lot of times can create some confusion within the athlete's body about what they're supposed to do, and it's actually going to inhibit, it's going to slow down adaptation. So looking at grouping rhythms is pretty important. Looking at range of motion, I talked, if we're doing a speed session, we might do above knee snatches because that range of motion, that knee angle is more close to where we're at when we're on ground contact during sprint versus this full range of motion is going to be more similar to your range of motion coming out of the blocks. So those times we'll group by range of motion, and then we'll also group by coupling time. So acceleration development, your first push out of the blocks, you're going to be on the ground the longest. Your second step out of the blocks, you're going to be on the ground the second longest out of a 60 dash, 100 dash, whatever that is. So when you're on the ground a little bit longer with your acceleration development, it makes sense to do some multi-throws. So we might do an overhead backwards throw with a shot put and a between legs forward throw with a shot put. But having that little bit of resistance, you've got a little longer coupling time, a little longer ground contact time. So those are going to pair together very nicely. Whereas speed development, you're getting off the ground much faster, 0.083 seconds to apply force to the ground when you're sprinting at max velocity. So you might be doing pogo jumps or something like that where you have a much faster ground contact time, a faster coupling time. So those are going to pair together very nicely. So when you're designing that train, you can look at those grouping considerations, and I think that's something that makes a huge difference in how quickly the athletes adapt for you. Neural days, kind of talked about this. We're going 90% plus as far as our intensities. Again, we can keep it safe. I mean, we can do 10-meter scrambles at 100% effort, and we don't have to worry about pulling muscles, right? Sometimes people think, 90% plus, that could be scary. That could set up injuries. But as long as you're plugging in the right exercise, the right prescription, you'll be good. Recovery may take 48 hours plus. Obviously, depends on how you set that up and how they're recovering. You want to make sure within those neural sessions you're always keeping power output high. Keep in mind what you're training. You're not trying to train fitness, you're not trying to train toughness. I mean, there might be a place and a time to train toughness, but if you're trying to train intensity, you're trying to train the nervous system, you're trying to train quality, you've got to keep the power output high. So if you're doing 30-meter flies, you got a 30-meter run, and I'm trying to run 30 meters at max speed. If you see them at 25 meters starting to slow a little bit, kick that cone forward 5 meters and just have them do 25-meter flies. We got to keep that power output high. They start slowing down at 20 meters, kick that cone into 20 meters. Don't let it become something that you're not trying to make it. If you're trying to do speed development, make sure it's speed development. If it starts becoming speed endurance and they're slowing, they're losing the power output, we've got to adjust what we're doing. We've got to get out of that mindset of just work hard. So high intensity technical training should be placed on a neural day. So if we're doing a full approach long jump, we're doing full pole vaults, we're doing intense bounding, block starts, wickets for our speed frequency, stride frequency work, those type of things should be plugged in a neural day because those are 90% plus activities. Obviously, speed development, examples, acceleration, hurdling, in-outs, flies, sprint float sprints, overspeed work. Likewise with the strength development, if we're doing sled pulls, plyometrics, hill sprints, max strength, rate of force development, starting strength work in the weight room. These are all going to be plugged in on neural days because we want everything within that session compatible with everything else that's in that session. And then the stamina work, I've mentioned, I already kind of talked about that, so we'll skip that. General days are going to be looking the other direction. They need to be under 80%. Playing in the middle is necessary for like 400 meter runners because we need to do some of those, runs, some of that tempo work in that 85% type of range. But you have to recognize that they're not going to recover real well from that middle range. So if you have a middle range, you might need a general day before you hit another neural day. If you go with a neural day, a high intensity day, and then that kind of middle range for a 400 runner, you're going to throw some tempo in on them, some lactate work, and you try to come back for another neural day. It's almost 3 neural sessions in a row because I mentioned the end of the 400 hurdles. You're going to have that residual fatigue from high lactate levels. That's going to inhibit skill development, speed development, neural output. So playing in the middle, you have to be real strategic about when you're doing that. And that's why at the end of my week is when I'll plug that stuff in because then they have Saturday, Sunday to recover from that. Low intensity technical training does plug in well here. That can be dribbling for sprint mechanics, different wicket setups, hurdle drills, short run jumps, 6-step, 8-step, long jumps, that type of thing. Light bounding, just more technical type light bounding, rhythmic things. Could be some extensive tempo or circuits, hurdle mobility. Hurdle mobility, if you haven't played with it, that can be something that's nice to plug in different order in your sessions. If you've done some different bodyweight calisthenics and some med ball work and then you do the hurdle mobility afterwards, you got a little fatigue in the system, you're going to be working some different proprioceptors, you're going to get some different benefits out of the hurdle mobility versus if you have it at the beginning of the session, they're pretty fresh, they just finished the warm-up, then the hurdle mobility is pretty easy. So moving your session around a little bit for specific reasons can get you a little better adaptations or different adaptations. You can even grab a med ball with your hurdle mobility. I'll have them walk with that med ball over their head. And you can look at, how are they moving as a pendulum? Are they out here? They have different tightnesses, imbalances, immobilities, things like that. And you're going to get a little more burn through the shoulder holding a med ball up. So you're going to get a little bit of that lactate stimulus, a little bit of that growth hormone stimulus. So a lot of different things you can tweak a little bit to play with it and get some different benefits and adaptations. General strength, lots of times I'll start with time. If we're doing general strength or med ball at the beginning of the year, so it might be 20 seconds on, 30 seconds off or something like that. And they can kind of control based on how fit they are, how many reps they're doing. Later on, we'll go a little bit more and it'll just be, a set 10 reps or 12 reps or 15 reps or whatever that happens to be. But sometimes early in the year, it works out nice just to go for time and they can kind of self-modulate based on how fit they are or are not. Med ball catch and toss. Is good for a general day, doing core work, abs, back, additional prophylactic work like shin splint prevention type things, the bodybuilding in the weight room, getting that anabolic lactate stimulus, and then at the end of the session, if you need to do some special stretching, I need to do a lot of work with my javelin throwers because a lot of people just don't throw in the U.S. So they need that range of motion and stuff. So sometimes we'll plug in some special stretching or activity in the general session. I had more stuff for you guys. Let me open up for questions, and then I guess we'll have to let you roll. Any other questions that anybody has? No questions? So it was either boring or else it was really good? Do you want me to go for another 5 minutes and hit a couple more of these, or roll to your next session?
This presentation's gonna be available.
Yeah, I think it's being recorded, and then so I think you'll have a recording and it'll be uploaded online. So yeah, I guess we can do that. And then at the end of it, I do have my email address. So if you have questions and you want to email it, sorry that doesn't come up very well here. And I think the presentation I believe will be online also. Is that the right one? maybe that helps. So if you have questions about periodization or anything else, you're welcome to reach out to me. Email's typically the best thing. When I reply back, my cell phone will be in my signature, so you're welcome to call me as well. But yeah, we'll leave it at that.